Hello, my name is Eward Driehuis. I'm here at the FS-ISAC office in London, very sunny London, and I'm super excited to speak to none other than Teresa Walsh. She's been a staple in the threat intelligence and anti-fraud community for years, and I'm very excited to ask her a few questions about her career and what she sees for the future. Teresa, you worked at NCIS. Is that as cool as it sounds?
Well, it was definitely cool for me, but I was an analyst, so I wasn't one of the, gun-toting, badge-wearing people that you see on the TV show running after the bad guys and, having a lot of adventures. I had my own adventures, but at my desk in front of my computer, and was able to do a lot of more, I guess maybe a little bit more geeky stuff than the things you see on the big screen. But it was exciting to me, and it was cool to me because I was able to do a lot of things that I probably never thought I could do before, and really kind of test the boundaries of my skills as an intel analyst. It was my first job. So being introduced to the wonderful world of intelligence and figuring out where my place was. So it was cool to me.
So did you ever see one of those shows, NCIS, by any chance?
We did. Actually, I was working in Washington, D.C. at the Washington Navy Yard, where some of these shots are taken in the first season, especially. And they came to film the building so they could have a lot of those shots. And we actually got to see the first episode before it was aired on TV. And we all, crowded around a small little TV and had a VHS tape at that time, VHS tape, and pushed it in and watched part of the segment. And it was really interesting. And it was exciting at the same time, and nobody knew if it was going to be a hit or not at the time, and nobody even knew what NCIS was back then.
How on earth did you land a job at NCIS?
Yeah, it was a little bit kismet, a little bit accidental, where I was graduating with my master's degree in political science, international relations, and I was looking for a job. And I knew I wanted to do something international-ish. I had looked at different things like think tanks even, and I put out about 60 applications to find a job, and 3 came back with interviews, and one of them was NCIS. And it was right after 9/11, so there was a lot of new funding that had come in to hire intel analysts, especially junior intel analysts into the field. And I think I was lucky because a lot of people at the time who were getting hired were from the Ivy League schools, the big posh schools, and I was from a state university, so, nothing of, at that time, nothing of big repute. We didn't even have a decent basketball or football team, but now they're doing well. But I think I was lucky that I was able to get in and, find a job, thankfully, and stuck with it for the rest of my career.
That's awesome. So how was it to start out in that work and do pretty work that's pretty secret, yeah?
Yes, it is different, especially for a young person getting into it. It's kind of cool, and you're like, oh gosh, everybody's singing James Bond, so you're kind of thinking it's going to be like that, but it's not. I kind of joked that it was an extension of grad school because I was doing a lot of research, reading a lot of things, and writing papers, and having somebody grade my papers, and trying to figure out if they were good or not, and if I was making good analysis, basically. And so it's not exciting in the Hollywood sense of intelligence, but it is the type of work that I really like doing. And you do have to get a security clearance, and you kind of go through all that process. So that is very different, I think, for a lot of people to get used to, and a bit intrusive as well. But it's something that you do get used to. And I think after a while, if you really do like the work, you stick with it.
Yeah. And was this all in the post 9/11 era?
Yes, it was right after 9/11. And, of course, I was in grad school at the time, and, just like every other, American and other people as well, you have your stories about the day. And, but it was the funding push, because one of the findings that they had, of course, was that it was an intelligence failure. It was something that there wasn't enough communication and collaboration between the agencies. And so one of the reasons that they were hiring so many people is to try to push for more analysis to find those needles in the haystack and and to try to get people talking to each other.
Right. So that's interesting. So at a very, very early stage, you were infused with that feeling that that is truly important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the time, it was, as you probably remember, it was cited as a humongous failure, and one of the, the biggest intelligence operation in the world, couldn't see the biggest attack that ever happened to them come their way, and of course, it was compared to Pearl Harbor at the time.
Yeah. So you describe your work as, well, not being like the super sexy gun-toting, running through alley kind of work, but you did see different countries, and you went on several different, how do you call that, projects or
tours?
Tours, there you go, yeah.
Yes, I did. So with NCIS, I had the opportunity to go to the Middle East, and they said, "Oh, we're going to put an analyst in the Middle East. Does anybody want to go?" And I raised my hand. I thought, cool. Yes. We had, 2 wars going on at the time after 9/11. And that's where the action was. It was a chance to be in the field, to kind of use my knowledge in international relations, put that to good use, and really kind of do something different. And I think one of the things that really attracted me to it as well was that in Washington, D.C., I was sat in literally a giant room full of all these cubicles of analysts with their heads bowed over computers, just doing their work. And in the field, you're doing some of that, of course, but you're right next to your stakeholder. And they're sitting there reading your stuff right next to you and saying if it's good or if it's bad. And they will tell you if it's bad, and being able to say, this is not useful to me, rewrite it, and having that type of relationship with your audience, is unheard of for most places, especially if you're just sat, in a DC cubicle, and like I was, and being able to actually get to that point. I think that really made me a better intel analyst, because I was able to understand, what do they actually need? It's not what I think that they need. It's what do they need to do their job. And that helps convince me of the type of work I needed to do.
Right. So how many tours did you do?
I did the Middle East field office, and then I followed that up with the Singapore field office, and stayed there for several years, and then came back to D.C. before I moved on to the Army, and I became a contractor with the Army.
Wow. So similar work there?
Yes. It was a little bit different. So when I first came into NCIS, of course, it was post 9/11, so terrorism. Counterterrorism was the name of the game. And after a while, I kind of started realizing that, terrorism, everybody's so focused on the terrorism question. What about the foreign intelligence problem, that's still there? Yes, it was post-Cold War, but, those threats were still pervasive. There was still espionage and, corporate espionage, things that were going on. And so I started kind of leaning more and more towards that world, towards the counterintelligence world. And that's what I ended up doing at the Army.
How is intelligence and counterintelligence different? Because for people like me, I've never been in the Army, so I only know of intelligence.
Yes.
Tell us about the difference.
So a little bit reactive, or I guess maybe defense versus offense is a good way to kind of look at it. So where, in offense, you're trying to figure out what's going on. What can we find out more about? What are the bad guys trying to do? So in terrorism, it is the classic, what are they trying to target? How are they trying to target? Who's trying to target it? And, you're trying to find, that guy, coming to, blow something up, literally. And, it is very clear cut that way. With counterintelligence, you're trying to figure out, what is the foreign intelligence operatives trying to do, and how can you, stop them from doing it? And you're trying to be on defense at that point, and, trying to counter, their intelligence activities.
Yeah. So what's more enjoyable for you? Or does it have its qualities, both kind of processes?
They do both have their qualities. I mean, it is a different type of audience, if you will. So whereas, military personnel might be more interested in the counterterrorism picture, the force protection issue, because they want their troops to be safe. They don't want to pull, a ship into the harbor and, have it being met by a suicide bomber. So whereas in the counterintelligence space, it's much more, I guess, nuanced. There's much more kind of the intelligence failure is not a bomb necessarily. The intelligence failure might be secrets getting out, and kind of understanding that world and how that operates. It is very different, and so I enjoyed both sides of it, and I think that did help me again be a better analyst, because when you do have different stakeholders and different needs, you as an analyst have to change what you're doing and address those needs as well.
Yeah. So the people likely know you from your work in finance. So at one given time, there must be that you have left the government and moved to finance.
I did, yes.
What happened?
Well, I left it kicking and screaming because I really liked my job. But family comes first, and my husband is not in my industry. He's in a completely different industry, and it's sometimes hard to find a job in the same city when you're in different industries. And so, unfortunately, his job took him to New York City, and I really couldn't do the type of work that I did in New York City. So at the time, Citibank was forming the Cyber Intelligence Center, and they started hiring former U.S. intelligence community analysts to join their team. And again, kismet maybe that I saw the job advertisement, and it was in the location that my husband wanted to move to, and I applied and I got it.
That's awesome. Because when you went into the government, you were like a grad student.
Yes.
But now you were suddenly, you were the expert.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't quite say expert. Yes. I mean, I was seasoned maybe, but I think you're always kind of seeking that expertise in some ways. And I had developed at the end of my government career a real passion for the profession of intelligence analysis. What are we all trying to do? Because, you might have an army of 10,000 analysts, but if they're not coordinating and they're all duplicating effort, then it doesn't really mean anything. And so I started getting more involved in, the actual nuances of how to be an analyst and what do we need in terms of the intelligence community and how we can actually, kind of slice it up and coordinate better. And I was really getting into that when I left the government side, the public sector side of my work, and went into the private sector. So I did try to carry that passion with me, but I was very new to cyber. I mean, cyber to me was a tool. It wasn't an intelligence. It was a tool that humans used in order to do their deeds. And so to kind of suddenly get into cyber intelligence was very different for me. So definitely when I call myself an expert.
Right, so there you go. So the process, of course, you were seasoned in that way with the direct feedback that you got, but like to carry that over must have brought you a lot of good there. Are there many differences between working in the government and working in a bank?
There are a lot of differences, some good, some bad. I think with the government, they've been doing it for so long that there's a lot more understanding of what's expected, what's needed. So, if you're an analyst and you walk into an agency, they're going to say, this is what you need to do. Whereas in the bank, it was so new at the time. It was kind of like, well, what can you do? And it was a little bit of a Wild West in that sense, where this was a new area. I was not a coder. I was not a hacker. And so, somebody like me doing cyber intelligence, I did say that to the guy who was hiring me at Citibank. And I said, I'm not a hacker. And he said, that's okay. Because what we do need is somebody who understands intelligence analysis, the entire cycle, how to write for an audience, how to get that non-technical audience to understand the threat landscape. So I was able to bring my expertise in that sense, but it was still, a new horizon for me to try to figure out, well, what does this actually mean, being a cyber intelligence analyst in the private sector?
And did that work also involve focusing on bad actors and actor groups and so on?
It did. And actually, when I first joined, I just assumed that I would naturally look at nation-state cyber actors because, I was coming from that world. And so shouldn't I look at nation-state? But at the time, they were like, well, it's the cyber criminals that are giving us problems. They're going after our customers. They're stealing their money. These are the issues, that we have today. And so I kind of had to deviate from that kind of comfort level of talking about nation states and what nation states are trying to do, and trying to look at the ordinary, criminal hacker, and then try to figure out, how do I marry threat intelligence that I'm getting externally with the internal telemetry that I'm getting internally, and try to find the bad guy and try to protect our customers at that point. And so it was very, very different, and to try to figure that out. And, I was proud of myself that I was able to do some of the more technical things that I'd never done before. But, I had some good teachers as well. So able to figure it all out. But looking at the cyber criminal gangs and the malware developers, and, the old, Zeus crew was one of the first threat actors that I looked at. And, even now they're still getting arrested years later. But so it was different in the sense that it was a different set of bad guys.
Isn't it strange that really we're talking about probably 2013, 14, maybe those days?
Yes.
It's like barely 10 years ago. And in 10 years, it's like, but before that time, it kind of did not exist, didn't it? Yeah. It's that fresh, this line of work.
Yeah, exactly. And NCIS actually was starting to develop a cyber intelligence unit at the time. And, it was kind of one of those, what do they do again? It was so new. And, now everybody has it, governments and companies.
Yeah. Are some of the first investigations or projects that you did, are those the ones that stuck with you, or are there other events that stuck with you?
There are. I mean, there were things that, I very much geeked out on, where there was one use case where there was this fantastic vendor, a very small boutique vendor at the time, where it was just him and one other guy, and they were getting some really interesting information about cyber criminals and how they were doing account takeovers, usually with malware. And so they were, affecting a customer's computer, capturing their credentials if they weren't using multi-factor authentication. It was very easy back then, and then stealing the money, coming in and stealing the money. And so I was getting a lot of that information, and first stepping through it tactically about, okay, they say that this bad guy is logging into this account. Okay, let me try to find this account, and trying to see if I can find it. And so that was a very, very tactical level, but then starting to build up to, okay, now I'm getting used to these groups and getting used to the overall activity. How can I now, detect them in a more automated fashion? How can I find their signature? And I started really kind of diving into the telemetry, having all these different types of feeds, internal telemetry feeds around me, and trying to just match them up using the external threat intelligence to help me connect the dots. And there was one Bulgarian actor that I was looking at that I was able to find over 80 different fraud cases that we were mostly treating as separate at the time, and finding that they were actually all connected to this one threat actor. And I was able to do that through many, many hours of crunching spreadsheets, data crunching, and being able to put it all together at the end. So I was very chuffed with myself, as I would say here in London, and just very, very pleased that I was able to find a way to use external threat intelligence with the internal data we were getting.
So the interesting thing to me seems that what you're saying is that it also fed in the fraud process, or the anti-fraud process. So is that have you seen interest of banks and banking CISOs, not just in fraud intelligence, but also moving away further back to your first love of APT intelligence and such?
Yes. I mean, the world has changed so much. I mean, when I did join the private sector, one of the first things I would always see anyone give a slide of is the threat actor slide. There were nation states, there were cyber criminals, there were lone wolf hackers, there were insiders, and everybody had the same slide over and over. But then suddenly it did start to shift. Suddenly nation states were stealing money, and they were using it for financial gains. Sometimes organized criminal groups were starting to reach out to government and create relationships with them. And the lines were blurring. And so it was very interesting to see how things changed. But I think one thing that I actually thought that remained the same the entire time was that you're always going to have fraudsters on the digital space. And it's more so now, especially after COVID, because everybody even my parents had to move to online banking, being able to not go into a branch. You had to do everything online. Everybody's used to shopping online. They're addicted to their phones and being able to use e-commerce. The fraudsters are online. And that's something that I know your company especially, looks into quite a bit. But one thing I didn't understand is why are cyber intelligence people expected to just look at the network and not look at the cyber criminal space and the fraud space. And that's something we definitely did at Citibank. Where, from the early days, we were looking at how are fraudsters operating on the cyberspace. And that's something I think needs to be actually a given, is that the cyber team has a fraud responsibility as well. And it is now a growing trend. You see a lot of chief information security officers, CISOs, now having some sort of responsibility for fraud. Yeah. Maybe not owning fraud, but they have a slice of the pie and maybe a slice of the responsibility and accountability as well. And so now they need to get their cyber defense teams in on the anti-fraud fight.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. I think the industry is just trying to work out whether threat intelligence, anti-fraud, but also maybe even AML, how it kind of all rubs off of each other, doesn't it? And how do we deal with that on a process level?
Yeah, it does. But I think you kind of go back to the basics of how to do intel analysis is audience and purpose at the end of the day. And we might be talking about the exact same topic, but if your purpose is different than my purpose, there's no reason why we can't work on the exact same topic, because maybe my audience is AML people and your audience is cyber people, but we're talking about, Drydex or Game Over Zeus or whatever it might be that people were using. People were using to commit fraud and steal money. But it all boils down to audience and purpose. And, I did, right before I joined FS-ISAC, I actually had conducted a presentation about this and kind of talking about how our purposes actually dictate how far our intelligence does go. And, if you are just looking at the AML space or the fraud space, it's only going to go in those areas. But when you start collaborating, when you start actually working together, that's when you do see the connectivity and how each team can actually help the other. And at the time, right before I left for FS-ISAC, Drydex was the flavor of the month. And everybody was looking at Drydex. AML was looking at Drydex, fraud was looking at Drydex, and cyber was looking at Drydex. And we all kind of looked at each other and saying, "You're doing that? No, I'm doing that." No. And so we had to work together.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because you talked about collaboration and community. So it's that would be the biggest segue into where you are today, of course. But I'm interested because I remember those days, and you were roaming all the events already, and you were pretty well known. So why did you decide to move to FS-ISAC?
Yeah, well, I was doing the conference circuit, as I like to call it. And so, and especially because I had moved to Europe already, and maybe I was known in America, but I was trying to get known in Europe and getting a network started. And I valued that network. Even when I was working at the banks, you didn't need to have that sense of collaboration of you're suffering the same way I'm suffering. You're going through the same things that I'm going through, and let's work together. Let's join forces and try to help each other out. And so I started doing that very early on. And of course, it was Citibank. My boss at the time was a board member of FS-ISAC. So FS-ISAC was always kind of part of my work life. And I did value that collaboration. And so when I was starting to look for another job, I did go to the local regional director here in the UK and I said, "Hey, if you hear of anyone hiring, just let me know." And he said, "Well, actually, we're hiring. We're going to hire our very first full-time employees for Europe." And it just worked out. Again, kismet, right place, right time, and being able to take advantage of an opportunity.
Huge changes all in one go. You're moving to a different continent. You're moving into a different job. And what did it entail?
Well, at the time, there wasn't even a job description. So it was literally a phone call of, "Oh, you're interested in moving? Oh, we're interested in hiring you." And just kind of working out exactly what the job would entail at the time. And as the CEO at the time put it, he wanted to put the A in ISAC, so which was analysis and information sharing and analysis center, ISAC, and where there was a lot of information sharing happening between the members, but not any analysis happening, at least not from the FS-ISAC side of it. Maybe a member would share their analysis with somebody else, but so that was basically my job description. Put the A in ISAC and try to figure it out. And so I did, and it was a huge growth period. I've now almost been here 8 years, and we went to just little me at the very beginning. Bringing Lucy Escher, our MIA Intel officer at the time, in, and then growing to 20 people.
Wow.
What?
That's 20. That's also a fairly big chunk of the workforce in FS-ISAC, isn't it?
It is. And it spans 6 countries as well.
Wow, that's amazing. Multilingual and lingual and everything.
Multilingual, yes. We even have people who speak Australian, so.
So talking about that, I must ask you, what's it like to live in the UK after?
Yeah.
Born and raised in the US. Or were you born elsewhere?
No, I was born in the U.S., but I'm a child of immigrants. So my parents are originally from Peru and in South America. So I guess I always had that kind of flavor of being international, even though I grew up in a small town in the Midwest. And so where a lot of people, don't really move around that much. And I crossed an ocean. I crossed several oceans, actually, around my journeys and finally settled in London. My husband is actually British, so that was one of the drivers to London, but I love it. It is very different, but at the same time, it sometimes feels much more like home because London, especially, it's a big city, but it's very open, it's very green, it's very international, and so there's a lot of things I do love about it. And at this point, my children are all British, so we're here to stay.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. And the job, of course, running because the majority of FS-ISAC people are not here. What? It's not lonely, I hope.
No, it's not lonely. And actually our MIA office has really grown over the years as well. That's another wonderful achievement we've been able to make because, we started in the US. So obviously that's kind of our base of operations, our headquarters. We have about 4,000 US members alone. A lot of those are very, very small organizations as well. So, but then overseas, the UK is actually our second biggest membership. So, we have over 200 organizations, member firms operating here in the UK, and quite a bit of users as well. So, it makes sense to be in London, but we also had to expand because we started getting other membership hubs, as they call them, the Netherlands being one. And so we have people in The Hague, we have people in Singapore, we have people in Australia. And so, it has grown quite a bit because not just for time zone purposes, but really for understanding the threat landscape and what it means to our members in those countries as well. Because, especially if you're talking about nation state APT threats, and you're starting to bring in geopolitics, it's easy to kind of bring in geopolitics from the U.S. point of view. But we really did need to kind of talk about it from, the Dutch point of view or the Swiss point of view or the Swedish point of view and really kind of bring it home of why is this important? In intelligence, we call it the so what. What does this mean to me? I had, an admiral one time, luckily not to me, but to one of my poor coworkers, really could just kind of hammer them hard, kind of like, what does this have to do with me? What is this going to do to help my people? And it really hammers it down quite bluntly that if you don't do something that is relevant and useful to your audience, they're not going to use it.
So how important has been building trust in building your intelligence capabilities within FS-ISAC?
It's essential. You can't do it without trust. And a lot of people will say, well, how can you have trust with over 5,000 members? That's impossible. You don't have, I sometimes say 10,000 of your closest friends, in a room, but you end up doing small circles of trust. And so it is about, the UK or about the conference circuit, because some of us, we're in that conference circuit and we see each other all the time. you start to get to know people, and you don't want to tell somebody something sensitive if you've never met them before. And, sometimes if you haven't had a chance to see the whites of their eyes, as they said, just being able to understand them as a person, how are they going to treat the information you gave? Are you just like a glorified source, or are you a colleague, a partner, somebody that they can give this information to, and, you can trust that you're going to get something back as well. It's something that's going to help you. And that's really important to us, because we do want to help our members. We do want to help them understand the threat landscape. A lot of them, they don't actually have big intel teams, or maybe they have an intel team where, they're also the incident response team, or they're also the threat hunting team, where, they're doing other things besides intel. And so, they do need our help, and they do need to be able to trust us, though, in order to share something sensitive.
Yeah, it's like the old adage, in like everyone wants to share. If you ask who wants to share, yes, we want to share. Okay, who wants to be the first to give something?
Yeah.
And then suddenly all that. And that's what the building trust is for. And that's what you have done marvelously, haven't you?
Yes. So I've tried.
Not to be really, but that's what I'm telling you.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Yeah. I definitely have tried. I mean, the first step was just kind of getting to know people, making sure that they knew who I was. What, not that they're, looking at me going, I've never heard of you before. Why should I give you anything? But, saying, you're the one who's spamming me all the time, or you're the one asking me questions all the time, and being able to, suddenly put a name to a face, and, have a chit chat. And, I gladly go to conferences and just looking to make that human connection. I don't go, kind of fishing for good intel. I go to get to know you, and, hopefully you get to know me and trust me enough to say, yeah, this is good. This is what I want to be part of.
Yeah. So is there anything in your crystal ball for you?
Well, I think predictive analysis is always the brass ring, isn't it? So being able to, go forward in the future. And really what I have been trying to do is similar to what I've talked about already, is pushing intelligence analysis in the private sector as a profession. This is not just a side job. This is not just, being smart. This is not just about getting IOCs. This is something real. This is something that where you should say, I have an intel analyst, and I know exactly what that means. I know exactly what that should give my teams. And this is what I expect from them. These are their KPIs. These are my expectations of how they perform on the job, and what my teams get out of that intelligence as well. And we're not quite there yet, because right now it's a lot of, do you have an IOC feed? Or even nowadays, kind of like, oh, can Gen AI duplicate your job? So once we get to a point where, it is recognized as a profession that you do need a certain skill set for, and a certain amount of training for, then I think actually we will go much further. But it's been my soapbox recently.
Yeah. Well, and you have been standing on that soapbox for many, many years. And I think, here in Europe, when you mention your name, everyone knows your name in finance, right? Is that so?
I've gotten too popular, I guess, which is a bad thing for an intelligence person. You don't actually want to be known by anyone.
Well, for me, it was a wonderful pleasure to work with you in the last 15 years or so. I hope many, many more years will come. I want to thank you for sharing your stories with us, and see you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate being here as well and being asked to do this.